Today is draft day here in the Miami Marlins franchise on MLB The Show 23. I know it's been a little while, around a week since the previous episode of the series, which I do apologize about. I'm pretty sure at the end of the last episode I said that this series is going to be uploaded a little bit more sporadically, with Madden obviously coming out a few days ago. That's been my main focus. NBA 2K as well is only a couple weeks away too. So the consistency with this series might be a little off for the next few weeks, but once I get into a groove with Madden and 2K, this series will be back to super consistent as normal. For those who need a refresher, the team is playing quite well. We are 2.5 games behind the Braves for first place in the division, and we are currently the number one wild card in the National League as we gear towards the All-Star break. And in particular, we'll be going over the 2026 MLB draft today. I think we've drafted quite well throughout this series. We've added some really good prospects. Ronald Andino, Isaac Stu, our two most recent first-round picks. Tyrell Berry, Hitoki Nomo have both been very good prospects for us. Joel Beltran as well is developing. In AAA, Steven Alez has been on and off the big league team. Robbie Jones is really good. Joe Shearer, we didn't draft him, but he was a drafted player, and he is very close to being a big leaguer. Ryan Poles has played well in big league action. So we've drafted very well in this series. We had 3 top 15 prospects, all 3 of whom were drafted in separate draft classes of the series. And then we have 5 more players in the top 50, all of whom are in the back 10, but still, 8 top 50 prospects is pretty absurd. In the last episode, we went through the draft preview, going over some of the more notable players in this year's draft. In case you missed that episode, I will leave a card at the top right of your screen for you to go ahead and check out. This is a pretty intriguing group of players, and certainly a number of guys who I think the Marlins will look to consider. We're normally used to picking towards the top half of the first round, but since we made the playoffs last year, we'll be picking at 20th. Our scouts generally do a great job of finding pitching talent. This year, no different. We really like Darren Bush, but he's probably not going to fall to 20. I would look at some of these other guys down the board as potential targets for us. There's a lot of good position players I like as well. Ronald Rodriguez and Brian Sanchez at third base are certainly in play in the first round. Satchel Allert in the outfield as well. And then I think relief pitcher Andres Vina is kind of the wild card. It's normally against my philosophy to draft relievers in the first round, but he might be too good to pass up. So with that, the 2026 MLB draft is on the clock. The Oakland Athletics pick first overall. Obviously, we had the 20th pick. We also have a selection in the competitive balance round B, 71st overall. So let's get this show on the road, shall we? With the number 1 pick in the 2026 MLB draft, the Oakland Athletics select starting pitching prospect Darren Bush. Our scouts feel that he is the best prospect in the draft, and this is a phenomenal selection by the Oakland Athletics, who just need talent, period, because they don't really have a lot of it. The Washington Nationals, with the second pick, select Darryl St. Aud. This is a guy we liked a little bit down the board, maybe not so much in the top 2, but as we learned last year, if there are guys who you like, even if they're projected to go rounds later, you just gotta pick them. If you like a certain player, chances are other teams do as well. Clearly that's the case with Darryl St. Aud. And then with the third pick, the Colorado Rockies select Mario Marin, the projected number 1 pick. Our scouts not so high on him. If he had an L in his last name and was Mario Marlin, I think our scouts would have liked him a little bit more. The St. Louis Cardinals select Leonardo Mora, a very talented outfielder from the Dominican Republic. He's an older brother in this draft class as well. Francisco Bruno, maybe the best offensive player in the draft, goes to the Pirates. The Tigers get Gustavo Magana, a very talented shortstop who does have some medical question marks. Juan Cordova to the Royals. I don't normally see relief pitchers go this high, even if they're projected this high, but clearly they like him. John Reyes to the White Sox. This feels way too early, but okay. Danny Gabriel to the Brewers. We liked him. Maybe not in the first round, but we liked him. Philip Meyer to the Orioles is a pretty good pick. We never thought there was a realistic shot he would fall to us. We were hoping Lorenzo Chavez would fall. Unfortunately, that is not the case. He goes to the Twins. Chavez was probably my number 1 target in the draft. And then Juan Figueroa, another guy I liked, goes to the Reds. Brian Sanchez, we like him. He goes to the Braves. Ronald Rodriguez, we liked him. He ends up going to the Giants. All of our targets are flying off the board now. Ronald Park was a good backup option for us. He is gone as well. Yusniel Rincon goes to the New York Yankees. We were high on him early in the process, but not so much late. David Calhoun, pretty solid pick there by the Mariners. The Mets get Enrique Quinones, the Mexican starting pitcher, another guy who we really liked, and I'm disappointed does not fall. And then Frank Linter goes to the Padres. Picks 11 through 18 are all guys who at one point in time I did like throughout this draft. There are still a couple good targets left, but I feel like the board did not play out very well for us. So there are some intriguing names here, particularly Satchel Allert and Andres Vina, and I really think this selection will come down to one of those two. There are a lot of good starting pitchers left, but I think we can find those down the board. Satchel Allert is probably the prototypical pick here. He's a talented outfielder, good contact, good plate skills, pretty solid defensively. This is the type of guy who you can put at the top of your order, and you're confident he can get on base and score runs. Andres Vina is a little bit more of a wild card, though, because he's 22 years old. I never draft relievers early, but I think this is a guy who could make an immediate impact in the bullpen. He could skip right through the minor leagues if he wants to. He's so polished. But it is also against our philosophy to draft relievers. If we were a bad team, this would be a no-brainer. We would pick Satchel Allert. But with Andres Vina, it really is an interesting question because we are a competitive team looking to win a championship within the next few years, and it never hurts to add more relievers in the bullpen. Plus, this is not a guy who only needs to go one inning. He can go multiple innings at a time. So it's a very interesting dilemma that we've got here. Do we go with the obvious pick and choose the outfielder, or do we go to the bullpen? With the 20th pick in the 2026 MLB Draft, the Miami Marlins select Andres Vina, a right-handed relief pitcher out of Venezuela. Drafting a relief pitcher in the first round is largely against my drafting philosophies. However, I'm willing to make an exception for Andres Vina because I think this is the type of player who can step into the bullpen really as early as the beginning of next season. I don't think he's going to need to pitch an inning of minor league baseball because he is so polished. All of his per-nines are really high, and that really shows a level of consistency that you're going to get out of him, which is going to be nice in the bullpen. He doesn't have any major weaknesses, which I think is a big asset. I don't think we're drafting the next Edwin Diaz or Josh Hader here, but I think we're going to get somebody who will be a steady reliever for a long time, who has a higher floor than really any player in the entire draft class. I'm very happy with the selection of Andres Vina. I feel like a lot of people might disagree with it. Instead of picking the outfielder Satchel Allert, who is a really solid prospect in his own right. If Allert was a can't-miss guy, I probably would have chosen him. But I do feel like he has some weaknesses in the power and arm strength department. As he ends up going to the Dodgers, he feels like a really Dodger type of player. So that probably means he's going to be a 15-year MLB vet who has a couple of All-Stars and ends up being really, really good. Let's wrap up the rest of the first round here, seeing the final few picks. Eduardo Palmeiro was a guy we kind of liked, but I think both Allert and Vina are both better prospects. Other than that, nobody we really had our radar on for the second round would end up going here. As we get into the competitive balance round A, we've had a selection in this round pretty much every other season. We don't have one this year, but we do have one in competitive balance round B, which is a little bit later, but still an additional top 100 pick certainly does not hurt as a small market team. Elliot Ramirez is a guy we kind of liked. He goes to the D-backs. I didn't like him enough to consider him in the first round, but had he slipped, I guess it would have been a pretty solid pick. A lot of the closers are starting to go off the board. Maybe this is the range where Andres Vina would have gone if we did not select him, but since we can't trade draft picks, the only spot we could have gotten him was at pick 20. Into the second round now. It's certainly a lot harder to find talent at this point in the draft. Fletcher Gill is a talented starting pitcher. He goes to the Pirates. This is really the range where I think we could see a lot of good pitchers go off the board. Alexis Ramirez, in my opinion, was by far the best position player left. If not him, maybe Kendrick Pettit, and they both go very early into the second round. Two guys we would have targeted had they fallen, but I did not expect them to fall into the 50s. We're around 10 picks away now, getting fairly close. Of course, not everybody does have a second-round pick, mainly thanks to signing players who were on qualifying offers. Bo Bichette did have a qualifying offer, but since we signed him late enough in the offseason, it was taken off. So luckily, we don't lose our second-round pick as a result of signing him. We're getting closer and closer to our selection, and not a lot of the pitchers who we're super high on are being selected. So it looks like we're probably going to have our choice of the pitchers, or maybe a couple position players as well. It is certainly a lot harder to find position players at this stage in the draft, in my opinion, so maybe that's the route we end up going with here in the second round. 2 more picks to go. That'll start with the Mariners. They get Felipe Perez. He is an outfielder. And then our division rivals, the New York Mets, select Evan Bird. He was a player we had on our radar. I think the medical would have scared me off a little bit, but he was a guy we would have at least considered here. So with that, the Miami Marlins are on the clock here at pick 54. Obviously, the starting pitchers are the guys who pop out, and there's really 5 or 6 good ones at this stage of the draft. If we want a position player, it's certainly slim pickings between the good ones left, and I think if we were to go for one, now might be our best bet, especially because we pick fairly soon again at pick 71. We can get a pitcher then. So with the 54th pick in the 2026 MLB Draft, the Miami Marlins will select Justin Mora. He is an outfielder from the Dominican Republic. He is also 22 years old, another older prospect, but with age comes wisdom, I guess. Justin Mora is a really talented player. His younger brother, Leonardo Mora, was drafted earlier today, 4th overall by the St. Louis Cardinals. And now Big Bro will go here towards the end of the second round with the Miami Marlins. I would argue he might have more overall potential than his younger brother. He's just a little bit more raw, which is odd. Normally that's what you would say about the younger guy and not the older one. Justin Mora is a switch hitter. He can hit from both sides of the plate, which is a major asset. I think his contact is a little bit farther along than his power. Defensively, he's pretty solid. He's a pretty good athlete. He just seems to lack some of the intangibles, which isn't ideal considering he's already 22 years old. But I don't think he's too raw to where it's a major problem. I think by next year, he could be a guy who starts in Double-A and is able to produce fairly well. Pete Quisenberry was a guy we like. He goes to the Blue Jays. Other than that, nobody else we really had our eyes on would go in the second round or the compensatory round as we make it into the competitive balance round B to our selection at number 71 overall. As I expected, most of the pitchers are still there, while Pete Quisenberry is gone. Pretty much all of the other pitchers that I had my eye on are still available with this selection. We got our position player in the last round, so presumably we're going to look at one of the pitchers here. I think Mario Santo, of the 3 guys we're looking at, would certainly be the most wild card-esque pick because he did opt out of his physical exam. And I just think he has a much lower floor than these top 2 guys, Dominic Rubio and Adrian Irman. We'll start with Rubio. He comes from Canada. I think he's a pretty solid player across the board. He throws decently hard. And then with Irman, I think he's a pretty similar player. He is a lefty, though, which I think is an asset, and I think the floor with him is actually a little bit higher than it is with Rubio. So with the 71st pick in the 2026 MLB Draft, the Miami Marlins select Adrian Irman, an 18-year-old left-handed starting pitcher from Massachusetts, born and raised in Puerto Rico. I think the tiebreaker between Irman and Rubio is that Adrian Irman throws left-handed. The 2 of them are pretty equal as prospects in my opinion, so the fact that he throws lefty is a tiebreaker for me because we don't have a lot of great lefty arms in the system other than Hitoki Nomo. I think Irman is really raw. He's got a long ways to go, but I think the upside with him is really good, and we've done a very good job of drafting pitchers in the middle rounds in this series, like Robbie Jones, Hitoki Nomo, Tyrell Berry. It's pretty consistent with our organization, so I trust our development with a guy who's a little bit more raw than those other players we've picked. Dominic Rubio would not wait to hear his name too much longer. He gets drafted by the A's. As we make it into the third round now, Mario Santo, the other pitcher we kind of had our eye on, ends up going to the Baltimore Orioles, and that'll bring us to our selection at number 94 overall. So what do the Marlins do here? Because a lot of the pitchers we like are gone. I think there's 2 position players that kind of catch my eye, and other than that, the pitching depth left on the board really is not all that good. So it might be time to go back to looking at position players. The 2 guys who I'm intrigued by are Amari Casto and William Ford. Casto is a very good athlete who is a phenomenal defensive prospect. He's super fast. The problem is his bat is so raw. He has got a long ways to go offensively. And then we've got William Ford, a switch-hitting third baseman from Canada. He's nowhere near the defensive player that Casto is, but he can hit from both sides of the plate, and I think his offense is a lot better. With the 94th pick in the 2026 MLB Draft, the Miami Marlins select William Ford, an 18-year-old third baseman from Canada. After starting this draft with a couple of older players, the Marlins are going to draft back-to-back high school players with Adrian Irman and now William Ford. I like Ford's overall ability. He is going to come in a little bit raw, But I do think the long-term upside with him is really solid at this range in the draft. He's a big kid who, again, can hit from both sides of the plate. Defensively, he's nowhere near as good as the other prospect that we considered, but he's not necessarily a liability on that side of the field either. And I think his offense, particularly his power, really is not too bad. And I think he's got a very moldable skill set to where he could be a pretty good player down the line as a corner infielder for us. He can play both third and first. He might profile more as a first baseman long term, but we do have plenty of first basemen already in the system. So as we go through the third and fourth rounds, Omari Casto ends up going to the Mariners just a couple picks before us. Casto's offense did really turn me off a little bit. Whoa, pause. But I didn't really like picking him here anyway. So none of the guys I really wanted ended up going between our third and fourth round pick. The reason why there weren't a lot of players who I wanted were selected is because there aren't really many guys I want left to begin with. There really is not a lot of talent left on the board. And we tried to scout some later round players, but there just really are not many gems in this year's draft, unfortunately. So we're going to have to do some digging and potentially look to take a shot in the dark. There is an outfield prospect who we scouted who is projected to go in this range, who we do like a decent bit, so maybe that's the route we will end up going with. With the 124th pick in the fourth round of the 2026 MLB Draft, the Miami Marlins select Broderick Sinclair, an outfielder from the Dominican Republic. The potential with him is really solid. A very high ceiling, and he's got a pretty high floor. He is a little bit raw, but he's going to have at least B potential, and he's not like too old to where that's a problem. 21 years old is not ideal, but it's not like he's 23. All three position players we have drafted are switch hitters, guys who can hit from both sides of the plate, and Sinclair's ability to do that is certainly an asset. He's a guy who's pretty well-rounded. He doesn't have any major weaknesses or major strengths. He's got a long ways to go in his development, but I think he could be a pretty good player. And fun fact, he grew up on the same neighborhood as the Mora brothers, including Justin Mora, who we drafted just moments ago. The other guy we kind of considered was Kevin Hidalgo. He goes to the Dodgers, as that'll wrap up the fourth round. Into the fifth round now. Again, not a lot of guys who we were considering ended up going because there aren't many players who we really like to begin with. We could go with one of the very few pitchers left. I believe there are only 2 starting pitchers left in the entire draft with Andrew Reed and Brian Oliva. There are still quite a few position players. Most of these guys we haven't really scouted, so our best bet is probably just to take a swing on upside, very similarly to what we did last year with Johnny Henderson. That move obviously paid off. Now, we're not going to get as lucky, most likely, as we did with Johnny Henderson, but we'll see. With the 154th pick in the 2026 MLB Draft, the Miami Marlins select Greg Hancock, a third baseman from Venezuela. Maybe not the most Venezuelan name I've ever seen, but it'll work. The Miami Marlins have drafted 6 players today, all 6 of whom, interestingly enough, were born outside of the U.S. The Marlins have really done a good job of scouting international players in this year's draft, and clearly it is shown. So the thing with Greg Hancock is that he does have very good potential, but he is just absurdly raw. Offensively, he has a very long way to go. I think he's got some good pop, but his contact and plate skills are really bad. Defensively, he's fine. It's really the offense that is the concern with him, but I think he has the athletic tools to develop. It's just that he is a super long ways away from doing that. So Greg Hancock is the pick for the Marlins here in the 5th round. Again, nobody else we were really targeting would go in the 5th round, and the same can be said with the 6th round, because again, there really are not many players we like left. So that'll bring us to the 184th pick, our final selection of the day. Both of the starting pitchers who were left are still there, and I think this could be a range where we take a shot on one of these guys. Andrew Reed is a top 75 player in the draft according to our scouts, but he did not pass his medical. Clearly that's an issue for some teams. And then there's Brian Oliva as well, the other starting pitcher, who seems like a decent prospect himself. We really only get to pick from around 30 players or so total, so our player pool certainly is slim. With the 184th pick of the 2026 MLB Draft, the Miami Marlins select Brian Oliva, a 22-year-old starting pitcher from the University of Florida. The medical with Andrew Reed scared me because it's clearly scaring other teams. Brian Oliva did not take a physical, but at least he didn't fail it. He was born in Pennsylvania, currently playing for the University of Florida, where he's been one of the better pitchers in the SEC. It doesn't hurt drafting guys from the area. I get that Gainesville, Florida is on the complete other side of the state that Miami is in, but still, state of Florida. Interesting connection. Oliva is a talented senior who was one of the best pitchers in the SEC. He's 22 years old. The Marlins have drafted a lot of older players this year. I think that's at least 4 players who are at least 21 years old. I mean, age is just a number, right, Wander Franco? Let's wrap up the rest of this draft now. Only around 10 or so picks to go. Roscoe Wheelman goes to the Rangers. Kevin Keane is not too bad of a prospect. He goes to the Diamondbacks. He's a super raw reliever, though, and we've already drafted a reliever, so that's why I kind of went away from him. Ken Felton to the Guardians. Giovanni Palma goes to the Houston Astros. The Los Angeles Dodgers have had a really solid draft. I think Sean Batista in this range is about as good of a pick as they could have made. James Kincaid goes to the Toronto Blue Jays. The Tampa Bay Rays will get Morris Ridley. The Philadelphia Phillies are up next. They will go with Francisco Rios. 2 more picks to go, the 2 World Series teams from last year, as the Angels get William Payton, and then Mr. Irrelevant, belonging to the reigning champion Chicago Cubs, they'll select Carlos Ramirez. So that'll wrap up the 2026 MLB Draft, a pretty successful one for us, in my opinion. I know this was certainly a different strategy than we normally go with. We normally look for upside, we look for youth, but now that we're a contending team, I don't mind drafting older players, such as Andres Vina, who could make an impact sooner rather than later. We drafted 4 players who are at least 21 years old, clearly not afraid of grabbing older talent, because I think these guys were significantly better prospects than some of the younger players on the board. We're going to work on signing our players in the next episode. We're going to go through the All-Star break and make it up to the trade deadline. Again, I apologize that the series hasn't been super consistent as of recent. Obviously, with Madden coming out and 2K coming out soon, those are going to be my main focuses. But I still plan on uploading episodes somewhat often of the series, and again, once I get into a groove with Madden and 2K, the series will be very consistent as it's been. I hope everybody enjoyed. Let me know what you think of our draft class down below. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Peace out.